Welcome to the Zelda Informer podcast. I am your host, Alfred Tabax, joined today by Andy Spiteri.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Andy, is it true that you were raised by moose, as all Canadians are?
Raised by a moose and born from ice. Yes, that's true.
Man,
don't tell anybody.
Such a difficult existence, isn't it?
Yeah, well, enough maple syrup will get you through anything.
Exactly. And that's pretty much your bottle-fed maple syrup from birth, so...
Yeah, they hook it in your veins.
So this week we're going to talk about... I really wanted to hit on video games as an art form. I don't think we've talked about that on this podcast before. If we have, it's been a very long time. So I just kind of wanted to see where we fell on that. But first, Andy, I want you to give your definition of art. Like, when you think of art, like true art, not like, modern art where it's like a square, it's like, this is supposed to have some hidden meaning. But like, what when you think of art, like whether it's a film or just some music or even a piece of art like painting, what do you think of, like, definition wise?
I always think of that one saying, it's like, I don't know good art, but I do know what I like, or whatever. So I think of that right away, because I think there's a lot of different definitions that you could define art as. I guess, like, I don't know, mine would be something that invokes an emotional response on some level. And that can be visually, that can be via a message that it is trying to say. It can be through a lot of different things. I guess, like, when I think of art, I kind of default to visual images. Mm-hmm. But like music can definitely be art as well. I think we even kind of discussed that in our podcast a little while ago, how like music really adds to video games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess just like, I don't know, like it's hard for me to define, but I know it when I see it, would be my best bad answer. How about that?
I mean, I agree. I think that art is something that is that evokes an emotional response from you, like a work or something that's created that elicits a response. And we kind of have to be a little bit more like specific on that too, because saying movies are an art is true, but not all movies are art. Mm-hmm. And it depends on which way you're categorizing it too. Okay, so like, let's talk about, like, if I'm thinking about the Transformers franchise, from a story perspective, it's not an art.
That's like the Ed Hardy of art.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider that as like art. However, from a special effects standpoint, especially the first movie, that's pretty artful. And so it really kind of, you have to qualify it sometimes, but I do think ultimately when it comes down to it, it's something that, gets a response from you, an appropriate emotional response, mm-hmm. Whether that's like awe, wonder, or, fear, sadness, whatever it is. Because even though the Transformers franchise is, for all...
awful.
Yeah, it's awful. It sucks.
It's awful.
Even but still sitting through and watching the first movie and seeing like the gears change in the close-up shots as the Transformers transformed, I was like, that's actually pretty cool. The way that they did that. And so to me, it's like, that's cool. That I'd consider that specific thing that they're doing there, the special effects, as art. I wouldn't necessarily consider the whole thing art. So how then, if we're qualifying art, how do you think that video games would fit into that mold of art?
I guess when I think of art in video games, it would be like kind of a blending of surreal visuals, which is like a thing that is unique to video games. Mm-hmm. Because they have, I guess video games and animation both have this in common, where they can create a little bit more. They're not tied to being realistic. They're not really tied to anything, so they can just create a world or whatever that's mm-hmm. Pretty surreal, blended together perfectly with music, blended together with something via a story, or like something that kind of invokes an emotional response out of you. Would be how I would define it. It's probably easier for me to list off the games I would consider as art, and you can draw your own definitions based off what I would consider to be art in video games, rather than for me to like explain it. Like I said, like I just kind of know it when I see it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think one of the benefits that video games have over movies is that they're longer, and that they can be longer. They're not really restricted by time. And granted, movies aren't restricted by time. Like, there's no law that says, oh, your movie has to be, this long or can't be any longer than that. It's more of an attention span thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas games can be broken up and broken down, and you could play it for 4 hours, 5 hours, and then be like, you know what, I'm going to save the rest of this for later, and then keep coming back to it. And so you can get a full story, like with really well-developed characters, in like a 20 hour game or 70-hour game or whatever it is. Like, I think I've clocked in at this point, before I did my New Game Plus, 70 hours in a Persona 5. And so, like, you got to see the characters and understand the villains, and you got to see all that kind of stuff that you really wouldn't normally see in a movie that's 2 hours long. So I think that they have a benefit there, and that they have more freedom to explore things. Whereas in movies, not that they're constrained, but they're constrained by their audience. Because
even like Lord of the Rings, that's my favorite movie franchise ever. I love them. I don't know if I'd necessarily say they're art. They're excellently made in every aspect, but I don't know. I guess it's tough for like a non-artistic person like me to kind of quantify that, but
you might have made some enemies there saying that you don't know if they're art.
Well, and like, I love Lord of the Rings more than anybody. I've written a lot about it. I've watched them all the time. I just don't know. I wouldn't consider that art necessarily so much as just excellent filmmaking,
Yeah. And that in and of itself can be an art though too.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by definition. If you're talking like the art of filmmaking, then Lord of the Rings is a masterclass. If you're talking music, it's a masterclass. If you're talking pretty much everything that Lord of the Rings did was perfect, and I'm trying to think of like a movie.
Well, except for the last Hobbit film.
Oh yeah, we're not counting The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. That's no. I'm taking a look at my movies right now, and I'm looking for something that I would say is like truly art, and like, I don't know. I don't. Maybe it's just me. I'm not sure that I would define movies as art necessarily, but again, that's a pretty non-artistic person talking here. So
yeah, I mean, I'd consider movies an art. Like, again, you have to break them up into specific parts to look at what is exactly the art, like what you would consider artful about it. And there is an art to movies, but movies can also be an art, and those are two different things. Having an art to movies is like there being a specialty, and it takes a special kind of person to do it. But anyone can go into iMovie and make a short film, but very few people can spend millions. Well, not very few people can spend millions of dollars, but very few people could put out an exceptional film that a lot of people like. And like you were talking about with Lord of the Rings, like how the music is fantastic, the score, like all of that, it fits together to make what I'd say is a piece of art. And even movies like hate it or love it, La La Land, the movie that almost won Best Picture, is, I love the soundtrack to that. Not like, it's not my favorite movie of all time, but I really love the soundtrack. And again, when you say something is an art, or is art, you have to talk about what you mean, especially in a multimedia setting, because when you look at a piece of art, like a painting, there's not that it's one dimensional, because that in art there's, never mind, not gonna get into art, but you look at a piece of art and you're like, okay, this is one sole piece, so I'm looking at everything there is to see. There's no music that needs to be played along with this, there's no special effects, it's there and it's done. And so it is a, like, all of its pieces come together to form a whole, but it is the sum of its parts, for all intents and purposes. And while movies are as well, there's a reason why the Oscars are split up into special effects and costume design and, best actor. It's because there's different parts that are also art. And so when we look at video games, we also have to look at it in the same way. So kind of, if we want to quantify it in the same way that we do the video game awards, I guess, when you look at voice actors and special effects and even game of the year, I think that, we talked about how video games can elicit an emotion, or how art's supposed to elicit an emotion. And I think video games can do that. And that's, the point that I was making is that sometimes it can do it better than a movie because it has more time.
So yeah, it's hard for me, I guess, to define movies as art and to a lesser extent video games, but because my definition of art is so undefined. But like I said, I think I'll have a better idea of what I would consider art based off the video games that I would say are artistic. Because I don't know, I feel like something can be really well put together, like Lord of the Rings. Everything about it can be a fine art. The shooting is a fine art. The music, the acting, the directing, all that is it takes a great artist to do. But when it's put together, I don't know if I'd say that's art or not. I don't know. It's difficult for me, I guess, once again, to define.
Mm-hmm. So then you said that it's easier to talk about the games. So I want to split that into two sections. I want to talk about games that we think of as art, as they are truly a masterpiece in the sense that they kind of transcend just being a video game. But I also want to talk about games that have elicited emotions out of us, since we kind of split up a definition of art there, as being artful, but also the fact that it elicits an emotion. Sometimes it's both for a game. Sometimes it's neither. Sometimes it's either or. There are some games that have elicited an emotion from me that I would not call art. So, and by emotion, I don't mean rage quitting. I mean a genuine emotion of something that you would it makes you feel, based on whatever quality of the game. So, talk about a game that some games that you would consider art first.
I will. Before I do that, I guess my thing is I define, if a game has a good story, I think that it'll make you emote. Whereas I don't know. Again, I wouldn't say that's necessarily art. The first game that comes to mind that I would immediately say, and that was a game that popped in my head as soon as you brought this topic up, was Limbo. Mm-hmm. So that game doesn't have a single word in it, I don't believe. But it tells a very distinct story by the usage of its visuals and the setting around you. So everything feels very surreal. The shadows kind of blend together, and it really does what, only a video game can do to accomplish. So that would be one that I would think right away would be an example of what you would define a video game as art. The second, I would say Ori and the Blind Forest.
I figured you were going to go there.
Don't know if anyone's ever played it. If you haven't, that's a shame because it's awesome. Just again, not really any words spoken, but just a surreal world with just tons of character, tons of personality and story that they tell by using just simple looks and glances, and it all just comes together so masterfully. Like I said, the music and the visuals and the setting just all kind of come together to form this perfect maelstrom that in the first 10 minutes I was just oh my god, this game is going to be amazing, and it was something I could just tell immediately. Mm-hmm. And I have a weird game as well that I would define as art, but in that weird kind of modern, you're looking at something that's not necessarily art kind of way.
But stay inside.
Yeah. Have you ever played the Stanley Parable?
Yes.
So I would define that as art because it's so odd and it's so out there, but it's it kind of provokes you to think should I follow this narrative? Should I, because the narrative is of him not following his narratives. You know, the story is about this guy who has a predetermined path, but his predetermined path is to rebel against his bosses. So, like, does he rebel by not rebelling, or does he walk the predetermined path that the narrator is speaking? And you can restart it in a bunch of different ways. It's just a very interesting game with many endings, and it's I don't know. It made me think a lot, which is something that I really like playing with video games. So those would be my examples off the top of my head. If you give me a few more minutes, I could probably think of some more, but I'll hand it over to you.
I think like a lot of people would agree with my first one. Some people would say it's overrated, but I'd have to say Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That game is it's unfinished, but it's a complete masterpiece. By the way, the visuals have aged pretty well, honestly. And if they're doing the remake with it, where they're updating visuals, I can't wait to see how that looks. The soundtrack is probably one of my favorites from any video game. The gameplay is simplistic but stylish. The story is simple, but it can make you feel. I wouldn't necessarily say that game like brought me to tears or anything, but still, like I consider that game a masterpiece. Just from the simple way it did everything and how it all worked together to make this like fantastic timeless game. I can't really think of anything else to say about it. That's just, if you haven't played Shadow of the Colossus, definitely play that game. It's one of the staples of gaming. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. It's if you haven't played it, you need to play it. There are not a lot of games I say that about, like, genuinely, but I'd say that if you want to experience something like a hallmark classic of gaming, definitely Shadow of the Colossus.
I think you could probably say almost the same about Eco, and even The Last Guardian was an attempt at artwork.
Yeah,
in video
but I don't
gaming
know
as well.
if Last Guardian did as well.
I don't know if it did either, but it still tried, which I respect.
Yeah.
I didn't really like Eco either, actually. I thought I played it, I think, after Shadow of the Colossus, so I kind of had higher hopes for it based off Shadow of the Colossus, and it wasn't really that great. But but like I still think that it strived for that, which is something that I respect.
I'd say that. And this is difficult because it's had ups and downs and flops, but ultimately the Metal Gear Solid series I'd consider an art. I'd put that in league with film, but just by the way the story progresses and the way he tells a story. And I mean, Kojima is like a god among men in the gaming universe. But I mean, if I had to pick a specific game, maybe Sons of Liberty. That game there very few games did what that game did. Very few were as bold in their political commentary around then. And that's something else that art does, is it, has criticisms for, the world, its society. And that game was all about that. So, I mean, Sons of Liberty it's not my favorite Metal Gear Solid game, but I definitely consider that game a piece of art and a genuine classic too. Sorry that I'm saying a bunch of PlayStation games, but not saying one's better than the other.
See, I would almost put Metal Gear Solid in with Lord of the Rings. That I think that I love Metal Gear Solid. I've played every one of them. I don't know. Kojima's an artist. I don't know if those games are like art though. I love the stories of them, but I don't know. To me, I feel like that's a good story.
How cinematic it is, and how the story takes you along is art. Like, just the way that, the controls kind of suck for some of the games, and they're really confusing because they change with every iteration. They finally universalized them in 5. But it's just, as much of a mess as 5 ended up being, it's still a great game. And the opening act to that game was fantastic. The hospital scene, it's just the way, like, he always
the way that it didn't end that sours a lot of people, and it sours me.
Well, and there's
really
a reason for that too. It's not really in his hands.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that there's a bunch of shit hitting the
Konami.
fan at Konami when this
Yeah.
was going on, but yeah, that was
But still, I'd say that, the way he does games and consequently his games as a film, I think that's the difference between him and other game developers is he treats games as a medium of film, as an interactive story experience, not necessarily like Telltale, but as an interactive story experience where you're going along with the story and experiencing it rather than just watching it. And I think that that's something that he always tries to do with his games. And so, for me, it's an art, just the way he does it. People are probably going to disagree with me. It's fine. Get some discussion going. But
I think it just falls onto where you think, like, do you define an excellent story as art, the art of storytelling? I mean, there's definitely an art of storytelling, If it wasn't an art, every game would have an amazing story. But I don't know. I'm not sure I would put that up there. Although, as far as like series go, you're absolutely right. Metal Gear Solid is particularly cinematic, and few series look as good as that series does when it's rocking and rolling.
yeah. And I mean, like I could probably think of other game series that I think of as art. Honestly, if you want to get into games as art, you're going to have to dive into indies, because that's where you really see a lot of games as an art form.
You see the most creativity on indies for sure.
Like Hyper Light Drifter. That game is gorgeous, and it plays like a dream. It's just that game feels like it's something that you would play in an art museum. As like, this is an example of where we are with this kind of like style of art form or whatever. I don't know. I look at that. I look at games like Origami, like you mentioned, Ori and the Blind Forest. Like looking at those types of games, like they're not big AAA games. Especially even Ori, it was published by Microsoft. It's not made by them.
Yeah, I don't think any of the games that I said were. I think almost every game that I would think of that I would consider artistic would be like a smaller indie game, perhaps with the exception of The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker.
Yeah,
which I would think is quite an artistic game, and it was quite bold, and it was quite a risk, and yeah, it used different art. It definitely had a style onto itself, which I thought was pretty courageous at the time to use. Especially when Nintendo was getting hammered for being like the toy manufacturer back then.
Did you ever play Bastion or Transistor?
I played Bastion, yeah.
Those games I consider art. Just like the style of the game, the music, and just the unique ways of telling stories. Like I'd honestly never played a game. Like, I've played plenty of brawlers and plenty of hack and slashes, but I'd never played a game with a story told in the same way as Bastion, which was really cool. And I think honestly, it's those subjective experiences that ultimately let us detail what we think of as art. And yeah, that's as much as people are like, no, art is objective. Art is very subjective, and it's largely based on our experiences that we view art through. And view the piece that we're looking at, and we're like, oh yeah, this is art or this is not art. I mean, so it's not like I'm going to agree with everyone and everyone's going to agree with me about my picks and your picks. But at the end of the day, I'd say that games can be an art form, and that there are some that I would consider art.
. I think if you consider movies an art form, you have to consider video games an art form because they're almost on the same level now. Yeah, I agree. I'm looking at this weird game that I've played called Botanicula, which is like very artistic. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's like this weird game where you traverse around a tree and you're this collection of little, I don't even know what you are, like little germs or something. Your little tree bits, and you play music and you stuff. And it's like $5 on Steam. That's an artistic game if anyone wants to give that a shot.
How did I not think about this? Journey or Flow or Flower. That's literally interactive art.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly, I've never thought of Flower or Flow as games. I've always thought of them as just art. Like, here's something cool that we made. Just kind of like sit along for the ride. I definitely consider those games art. Like, without a doubt.
I've never played them, but I wanted to. Because they look quite cool too. I think I'd be quite into that.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh man, these are like, fantastic games, but I'd say that they're fantastic experiences and fantastic art pieces.
Yeah, I'd throw like Gone Home into that category too.
Mm-hmm. So like you said, there's plenty of games that we could see as art, but what about some games that have made you feel? So it doesn't have to be a good game. At this point, I really just want to talk about, for us, you and me, some games that have gotten some emotion out of us and have made us, feel something. And you can make your list however long you want it to be, but I just want to know what games have made you feel, and, what did you feel based on those games?
There's two that immediately come to mind. Three, actually. The first is Final Fantasy IX. When you are, when you're going to the end of the game, I'm going to throw a spoiler warning out here. So you're going to the end of the game, and you've just engaged in a pretty intense battle with Kuja. And Kuja has like more or less redeemed himself. He's allowed Zidane and company to leave unscathed, and he's defended them against the kind of this calamity of his own bringing, but still he realized error of his ways and let him go. And then Kuja dies, which is kind of sad. And then you get this monologue at the end of the game, which is playing over like kind of an epilogue, showing everyone and all the characters and what they're doing after the game is over. And you realize have you ever played Final Fantasy IX, by the way?
No.
Oh man, I don't know if I even want to say this. It's so good. Okay, so you realize that one of the main characters is speaking, and he's a beloved character, and you realize that he's saying this as he is dying, and he's kind of come to terms with his own existence, and it's basically he's reading it as a letter that he had written to the main character Zidane. And
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. So I'm talking about Vivi, the little black mage. So he was created. Yeah. He was created and basically given only a small finite lifespan. So he is dying at the end of this game, and thanks Zidane for basically showing him why he existed. And he's like, my memories will be part of the sky. And it was so sad. And then right after that, you see Zidane finally get back together with Garnet, and like. It was like bam, 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 like all these things at the end of the game, and it was so good. So that one, I was like weeping, like I was a 5-year-old girl watching Frozen. So, second would be Metal Gear Solid 3, the ending.
Mm-hmm.
God, that salute kills me every time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't dare even spoil that for anyone that hasn't played Metal Gear Solid 3, because that's just it's so good.
That is probably my favorite Metal Gear Solid game.
Yeah, the less you know about Metal Gear Solid, kind of going into it, almost the better, because when I was playing it for the first time, I think I had played all of them in quick succession, and for like the first hour, I was like, that's weird. Solid Snake is in the 1960s. Maybe he just doesn't age. And then like obviously it kicked in after, but yeah, so I don't know, that was cool. And then the third is in Ocarina of Time, when you're leaving the Kokiri Forest and you see Soraya, and then you talk to her, and then later when you beat the Forest Temple, and it's like she will always be your friend. I just thought it was so sad, because you have this friendship that is like, in another life they could have been friends, but in this one it's just destiny is on tearing them apart, and it was sad.
I think for me, I've got a few games. I agree with Metal Gear Solid 3, but there's one specific part of Metal Gear Solid 4 that has always resonated with me. Like, I will always remember this. It's the fight with Revolver Ocelot / Liquid Snake.
Mm-hmm.
At the very end of the game, like right after you've taken out the Metal Gear, and you're fighting on top of that, like just doing hand-to-hand combat,
Right.
And it literally goes from like PlayStation 1 graphics to 2 to 3 to 4. And you like see the succession of like the characters with like really dramatic music. And I wasn't like crying or anything. I was like, it gave me goosebumps. I was like, man, this is intense. And this is really well done, because it's like, look where we are now. And this is the end of this like of this character's saga. And I was like, man, that's freaking rough. But that has always resonated with me. That game itself was a hodgepodge of, good decisions and bad decisions. But that part of the game was like, it's almost worth it for me to go back and replay it just for that scene.
Yeah.
I just love that part so much.
Oh, can I throw something in there quick?
Yeah.
Speaking of Metal Gear Solid, this was just like, it didn't make me sad, but it was such a bro moment. EE has just been assassinated by Vamp after you just bust your ass trying to save her, no less.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
like Vamp comes in, and there's this great scene, like Raiden is trying to console Emmerich, and so there's this great scene where Snake comes up, he looks at Otacon, they kind of don't really say anything to each other. Snake says a few words eventually, but like you can tell he's not good at that, so he gives him this big hug, and it's such a good moment because it's like it's such a Snake thing to do. It's like he is a man of words, but like in that instance, he just knew that there was nothing that could be said that would make it better. So he gives Otacon the hug, and it was like, oh, it was such a good moment, so good.
Then I have to say, and people always get on to me for this, but Undertale. Like if you play the game the way it's really meant to be played, it's gonna hit you hard. If you're
don't throw any spoilers out there, because I do plan on playing that.
There is at the very very end, like the final boss battle, not on the genocide route, but the pacifist route. The final boss battle after that, like that is, man, that was something special. I think I legitimately cried at the end of that game. And then there was one scene that like, it's just the way music in that game fits with everything. That game's such a masterpiece to me. It'll always be a masterpiece to me. But there's a scene where you learn the backstory to something, and it plays a rendition of the main song, like the Undertale theme song, really quiet and really soft, and it's just like solemn, even though it's kind of still like a not necessarily cheerful but upbeat theme. It's like, it's a dark story, and it's telling you the story and how it went, and it's you're just walking down a hallway, and it's just, oh my gosh, I don't have enough good things to say about that game. And then another game, this is actually the Undertale and this other game are in my top 5 games. I don't know how many of you have played it. This is by far my favorite Square Enix game of all time. But The World Ends With You.
I played that.
My gosh, that game is fantastic. I can't tell you a specific part of that game that made me feel, because pretty much the whole game was like that. I felt like the characters were so well developed, and even though some of them weren't likable, you got to know them well enough. It was like, man, I don't want to see these characters go. And then at the very end, like when, this isn't really a big spoiler, but because of the journey he's been on, Neku takes off his headphones and it's like, I'm ready to, engage the world. And just the way that the message of the title is, the world ends with you. It's like the world begins and ends with you. So, how you choose to be a part of it. And that was really, it might have also been what I was going through at the time, but it really resonated with me. And that game is always going to be one of my favorites, just because of how well it told its story and how well its characters were. It's a vastly underrated game. Not enough people played it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I played it, but it was hard for me to get past the card mechanics. I don't do well with card games.
It's difficult. On the original DS, I'd say if you were gonna have to pick between the DS version and the iPhone version, definitely pick the DS version. Because
it's probably far harder to find the DS version, but yeah, it's probably worth it. I would have to imagine.
But yeah, I definitely that game. And then I don't know. I'm trying to think of other games.
Have you ever played Xenosaga?
No.
So do you know kind of anything about that series?
Yeah.
So the main bad guy in that series, at least for the first couple of games, is this guy named Albedo, and he is this white-haired dude. He's related to one of the main characters in your party, and you never really know kind of where he's coming from, other than the guy is just obviously insane. If I had to compare him to someone, I would compare him to the Joker. Mm-hmm. So there's this scene in Xenosaga, the first game, where he gets Momo alone. Momo is this android in your party, and she is built to resemble I don't know, maybe like an 8-year-old girl or something like that. So, and she's an android or whatever. So you see Albedo in his lair, and he somehow lured Momo by herself into his lair, and you see all these other discarded replicants, they're called, these androids that look exactly like Momo, and they're just everywhere. And so that alone, with the fact that this 8-year-old girl has walked into this guy's lair, it's like super creepy and super uncomfortable. And like the scene that follows between them is so uncomfortable and weird, and he's literally trying to scare her. He's trying to frighten her so bad that she passes out and her like inner defenses, fail or whatever. It's kind of an out there mechanic, but like the point is he's trying to scare her to like basically to death. And so it's so weird. If you've never played it, I encourage you guys to YouTube it. It's called YouTube Albedo Mabel Pesh. That's French, because he starts quoting scripture in French, talking in French to her, and it's like you will feel super uncomfortable, I guarantee it, watching it. Which is great. I like Albedo as a villain, because I think like if you feel that way towards your villain, then he's probably doing his job right. But it's that always stuck with me. And there's like this gnarly music playing in the background. It's like this shrieking. It's super creepy. I encourage anyone to check that out.
I mean, more recently for me, Persona 5, like. I can't get enough of that game. I ended up having to buy the soundtrack, just like the full soundtrack, just because it was so good. There's a bunch of scenes, like different confidant scenes, that really got me. But there was no like F yeah moment until the very end, where I have this really bad habit of playing games on like hard, just to get the trophy out of the way the first time. So I'd been like struggling with this final boss, and I finally beat it. But then I don't want to spoil it, but like there's this really friggin' awesome moment in it, where you just annihilate the thing, and it's like this whole stylized final kill that was just like, man, that's badass. And it just like I don't know how to describe that feeling, but it was just pretty awesome. That whole game is awesome, but like that specific part, like I look back on them like, man, that was cool. And so like, it doesn't always have to make you cry. Like I think the very first this is really embarrassing. When I was a kid, the very first game that made me cry was Sonic Adventure 2 when Shadow died. Okay, I played it when it came out. I was like 5.
Were you crying because you were playing Sonic Adventure 2?
Hey, it's a great game. Don't. He like Shadow died, and I got really sad, and I cried. And I was 5 years old, and I remember that scene distinctly in my head and how I reacted to it. And I look back, I'm like, Alfred, you ass. Just why?
Just quickly to kind of throw Sonic under the bus here. One of our editors is talking today, and he's like, yeah, I bought Sonic Mania and the game keeps freezing and I don't know how to fix it.
On Switch?
I don't know what he bought it on, but...
It's probably... The Switch version is probably the one he's talking about, because it's buggy right now, to say the least.
I have to imagine that they're all buggy, because it's a Sonic game. So I read that and I was like... Never change, Sonic. Never change. and that right there, I guess, is proof that they'll make you feel something, because I still don't like Sonic in the wake of his feud with Mario. So there you go.
Yeah, but I mean, like, aside from, like, Zelda moments, like, Majora's Mask, that game is all about, sorrow and feelings, and no doubt, like, in my mind, that game is emotionally charged. For example, I went to a concert, I went to the first symphony round that they had, Symphony of the Goddess. It was me and one of my friends were sitting there, and they played Majora's Mask as an encore, and this girl behind me just starts bawling. And she's like, I can't handle it right now. Like, this is my favorite game, and I can't. And she was just having, like, the biggest meltdown listening to the soundtrack. And I was like, well, there's your example of how games can make someone feel, I guess. I mean, she was not having it, but she was having a great time at the same time. So, people are complex, I guess. Women are more so complex. I'm going to stop.
Amen. Yeah. What was that? We're talking about... yeah, they always played Skyward Sword at the end when I went to Symphony of the Goddess.
Mm-hmm. They always started with that the first time for me. Like, they started with the Ballad of the Goddess, and then they did the other games, then they ended with Majora's Mask. But yeah. Any other games coming to mind?
I was trying to think of some that make you feel in a more positive light. Like, I wouldn't say... Like, some games can just be funny. Like, I think that the Phoenix Wright series is quite funny. But I guess it's easier to pick out the games that that make you feel like, kind of make you sad about their story and what's happening afterwards. Because I can't think of any games off the top of my head. I mean, there's lots of games where I've, like, felt pumped going into a boss fight, or I've felt, like, awesome after doing something in particular. But I guess that those don't really stick with me as much as, like, the times that I can just remember, like, weeping at the end of Final Fantasy IX, for example.
The beginning to The Last of Us.
God,
I don't know how I forgot that.
I haven't played that either.
The beginning to that, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but in the beginning of the game, you get very close with the characters, just understanding their dynamic, and then something happens, and, like, I sat, like, put the controller down, and I, like, could not believe what had just happened. And I was like, I think that was the first time I think that was actually the first time since I was a kid that I actually cried at a game. Was at the beginning of The Last of Us. I was like, not like bawling, but like teared up. I was like, that is freaking rough, because that set the stage for his character throughout the rest of the game. And so you're right. Like, it is, it's not like there's certain moments in certain games where I'm like, yeah, this makes me feel happy and, like, makes me, smile. But I guess it's more impactful when something makes you, because typically crying isn't something we naturally do. Like, we naturally smile and we're, we try to be happy, but, we try to go out of our way to cry, or try to go out of our way not to cry, or feel that way, or feel sad, or empathize like that. But whenever something like that effectively does it, it's such an impactful experience for us that we remember it. And I think that that's why we remember those things, is because they're eliciting a response from us that we don't typically display, hopefully, that often.
The only other time I can think of where I had an emotion playing a game that really stuck with me that wasn't, like, sad or whatever was when I walked into the Forest Temple, which I've talked about before, so I won't talk about it again. But
yeah, well, we talked about that. I talked about the Shadow Temple too. It's just creepy, and it makes your skin crawl, stuff like that. Like that, that's still emotions, things that still stick with us. But it's also, like, the more impactful things are the things that make us feel feelings we try not to feel, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense.
We go out of our way to not, not that we try to be stoic all the time, but nobody wants to be the person that cries all the time or cries during movies. Like, the scene in Up, the opening scene for Up still gets me. Like, no matter how many times I watch that movie, that's pretty
I was actually, when I was thinking of Ori and the Blind Forest, I was thinking that the opening to that game reminds me of the opening to Up. Because it's so happy, and then everything goes sideways, like, real fast. Yeah.
And even just listening to the soundtrack, because that's all there is. There's no dialogue in the opening scene for Up. It's the opening track for it is just extremely emotional. And so, again, like, I remember those things. I hate the fact that I cry at the beginning to Up. still, which I wish I didn't, but...
You know what was really cute? I can't remember. I watched it last week, and it was made by Pixar. The name is escaping me, but it was about...
Cars.
No.
Cars 3.
It was like a little short film about this young boy, and like he was discovering that he was gay, and he had a crush on another boy, and like his heart kind of raced out of his chest, and like he was trying to hide it, and it was like... It was super cute, and
I don't know if that's Pixar, but I know what you're talking about.
It was. I'm pretty sure it was Pixar.
I don't know.
It looked like it was if it wasn't. Anyways, it was really cute.
I don't know if they'd be that ballsy to do something like that just yet.
I think they. Well, why not?
I'm just saying.
I will. I'm pretty sure it was, but anyways, it was cute.
Okay.
Speaking of Pixar and emotional moments,
so. I'll just kind of wrap it up. What have you been playing lately, Andy? What's been on your log, your backlog, your front log, side log?
So I've been playing Pokemon Go a lot. I'm back into Pokemon Go. I have one more Pokemon to go before my Pokedex is complete. So I need like 10 candies to get my Ampharos, and then I have everyone. That's 237 Pokemon. Not
where do you go from there?
But like,
what do you do at the end of that?
I don't know. I guess like I'm gonna help my girlfriend get the rest of her Pokemon, but like she's doing pretty good too because she usually goes with me. So I'm playing The Evil Within right now, which is kind of cool. Very artsy fartsy as well. Speaking of, it's like I was expecting more of like a psychological story, but it's definitely more psychedelic. Been playing Splatoon 2 here and there, and yeah, that's about it. I finished Wolfenstein: The New Order a couple weeks ago. So next on my list to play after that is Mass Effect Andromeda, which I finally got around to getting.
Yeah. Oops.
What about you?
I started a new game plus on Persona 5. I really want to platinum the game. Just because I got really close the first time. I only have like 5 or 6 trophies left. And I typically do that. I'll typically replay a game whenever I'm really close to the trophies. If it's not that, like, intense of a game. Like, for Horizon Zero Dawn, I kind of need to take a break before I do another New Game Plus through that game.
Right.
Just because it's more difficult, I'd say, than Persona 5. Like, more difficult to play. Like, especially the difficulty-wise, like, you know, going into it. Because I think the New Game Plus has like an insane difficulty or something that you can do, or like a really hard difficulty, and I want to try maxing that out too. But I'm really close for that. But I'm just doing new Persona 5 right now because I didn't get all the confidants, and I want to hear everybody's story. And I just really enjoy the game. Trying to max out compendiums, trying to get all of the requests done, all that fun stuff. And then I got a Vita a few days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
They still make those?
No, I got it used.
Oh.
That's a little bad boy right here. I got Persona 4 Golden for it. People are going to hate me for this, but 5 is still better in my opinion. It took everything 4 did and did it so much better. Sorry. There are people that really don't like that opinion. I've learned because I've made that opinion known in some Persona groups, and they do not like me for it. But I also have Gravity Rush, which is a fun game. Tearaway came with it just because they were like, hey, take this game. And then, I mean, I've got a backlog of stuff. Like, I have Until Dawn still to replay through because, we got it for PS Plus membership. Just Cause 3, which is my go-to game whenever I'm just like, let's blow stuff up. And then Doom.
Doom. I'm thinking of picking up Mega Man Legacy Collection because I want to replay them all.
Or 1?
The one that they just released, like the one that has Mega Man. I think it has like 1 through 7.
Yeah, that's the first one because they just released 2, and that's got Mega Man Legacy Collection has 1 through 6. 2 has 7 through 10 with all the DLC.
Yeah, I don't know if I want it. I'll definitely be looking at the first one.
7, I don't like that. I don't like the art style they chose for 7. It's weird.
I feel like at that point I'd rather just play Mega Man Zero
Oh,
or
gosh.
like Mega Man X or something like
you
that.
Want, you want to talk about a game that like had that made me feel was Zero.
Mm.
But that was an odd experience for me too, because I'd never heard of those games before when I got the DS collection for it.
Yeah. I had the Game Boy Advance one, and I've since lost it, and I'm mad at myself because that was a really cool game.
Mm-hmm. It's really difficult. Not as difficult as regular Mega Man games, because Zero moves a lot better. But it was difficult. It's looking back on it, I don't understand why they changed his design so drastically. Because I understand it fits with the game, that game universe, but like if you look at Zero in X and Zero in the Zero series, you can't tell that they're the same character.
Mm-hmm.
Like barely.
He's like some ninja now in the new one or whatever.
Yeah, rather than like a bulky fighter.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's what I've been playing. Yeah,
and just a reminder, Undertale's out for PlayStation. I'm waiting for my collector's edition. Zaki, one of our editors, is currently playing Undertale, and I might have hyped it up quite a bit for him.
No, I'm gonna get that like the second that it comes to Xbox.
Yeah,
I don't have a PlayStation. I really wish that I did.
I should have got a PS4.
Too. Oh, my PC just sucks though. Like it can barely play. Botanicula.
It doesn't require that much. I played it on like this Lenovo tablet with 2 gigabytes of RAM. You could probably get it done on anything. It's not that intensive. You can always want the best gaming experience, but like it'd be like playing Earthbound on an emulator in terms of quality, like of usage of your space.
All right.
So go for it. Everybody buy it. Buy it now. I'm not being paid to say this. Invest in gold. That's it for this week then, I guess.
All right.
You want to hear us talk conspiracy theories? I can do that for another hour.
Who detonated that nuke? Was it the boss? Was it
in 3?
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, I was talking about real conspiracy theories. We could talk game conspiracy theories too. We'll save that for a later date.
Yeah, game conspiracy theories. Tune in next week.
Why did Konami really fire Kojima?
Oh, I would love to know that. I'd watch a documentary on that.
We are the documentary on that. Let's go.
Yeah, we'll
let's pull all of our resources, all the money we're getting paid for Zelda Informer, and make a documentary on it.
Get ready for a very high quality documentary. Okay, guys. See you later. We better go before we get cut off.
Bye.
Bye.